Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Luke Frishkoff from Raleigh, North. You're from Stanford. Sorry, from Stanford University, and he's going to be talking about pre-adaptation to human environmental impacts. Deforestation filters species and facilitates geographic reshuffling. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Sorry about that little trip. I'm a graduate student at Stanford. We are here in Raleigh. I'll be talking about pre-adaptation to deforestation. My title, however, does contain a lie because I will not be getting to how deforestation facilitates geographic reshuffling because there just wasn't time. I was overly ambitious in my titling. But in terms of pre-adaptation, when we think about human impacts on the environment, one of the really major impacts when we're dealing with conservation issues is habitat conversion. So what this is doing is taking these natural habitats that have existed for thousands to hundreds of thousands of years, and over the space of a few decades, converting them into these evolutionarily novel anthropogenic habitats. So in terms of kind of a conservation vision, one of the things that we'd really like to know is whether species are going to be able to adapt to this gigantic change in environmental conditions that we're thrusting upon them. And when we're dealing with something like habitat conversion, one of the problems to even begin addressing this question is just the complexity of habitat conversion itself. It's not necessarily clear what the relevant selection pressures are going to be. So when you think about something like hunting of animals, humans go for the large animals, so it's selecting for small body size. Think about environmental classification. Species often adapt at very specific genetic loci to be able to sequester the toxins that we're putting into their environment. But the same isn't necessarily true with habitat conversion. So in terms of kind of the relevant hypotheses, we could imagine that selection pressures could take the form of biotic changes, so differences in biotic resources, competition-predation regimes, or we could think about biotic or abiotic shifts. So abiotic resources could change. The habitat structure is obviously changing quite a bit from this forest to this pasture. Or we could think about some of these more basic state variables like temperature and moisture availability. So to begin addressing this question, I'm working in this model system in Costa Rica, way down there in Central America. And I work on the southern border of Costa Rica, right on the edge of Panama. So this is a mid-elevational landscape that was deforested in the last 60 years, leaving this mosaic of deforested habitats like cattle pasture and coffee plantations, as well as more natural forest fragments. So when you go to these environments and just kind of experience them, one of the first really major environmental differences that you notice is the difference in temperature regime. So these are 3 days of temperature data, representative temperature data from my field site in southern Costa Rica. And really, it's quite obvious. The temperature in forest never gets much above 22 degrees, whereas each day during midday, the temperature really spikes in these pasture environments, elevating up to 10 degrees above that in forest. So this 10-degree difference seems like it's quite plausible that it's a really strong environmental filter and possibly a selection pressure for the organisms that are trying to survive post-deforestation. So in order to test this idea, I'm going to start with a simple kind of model system here, working with these 2 species of neotropical wheat-litter frogs. So the interesting thing about these 2 species in the context of this study system is that in this landscape, this species, Crowgaster crassidus, is only found in forest, whereas somewhat bizarrely, this species, Crowgaster fitzmiri, is only found in deforested areas. It is not found in forest. So this sets up this nice system where we can kind of test whether temperature tolerance is in some way pre-adaptation to deforestation tolerance. And the nice thing about these species is that they're ecologically fairly similar, and they're also phylogenetically quite similar. So this is a phylogeny of the genus Crowgaster, and the only thing to take away here is that these 2 species are shoved way down here at the bottom, so they're in the same species group and possibly sister taxa. So to begin to address this question as to whether high temperature tolerance is preadaptation to deforestation, we're going to be querying these two species at 3 different spatial scales. So we're going to be looking at individual jumping performance along a temperature gradient. We'll be looking at different microclimate variations within deforested landscapes. And finally, we're going to zoom out to the entire country of Costa Rica to ask whether the deforestation-affiliated species are found in warmer climatic zones than the forest-affiliated species here. And throughout these sections, you're going to be seeing figures that look something like this, where we have temperature on the x-axis and some response variable on the y-axis. And the hypothetical pattern that we expect to see is that the deforestation-affiliated species will have a response that is maximized at higher temperatures, whereas the forest-affiliated species will have a response that's maximized at lower temperatures. This is our hypothesis. So we're going to start by taking a look at jumping performance across temperatures. So this is jumping performance of both species expressed as the proportion of their maximum jumping performance. And the white points indicate the values for Preadaptation the deforestation-affiliated species, and black points represent the forest-affiliated species. And the nice thing about this nonlinear model is that it allows us to directly estimate the temperature optima from the data. And what you can see up here is that there's a roughly 2-degree Celsius difference between the temperature of optimal jumping performance for the deforestation-affiliated species relative to the forest-affiliated species. So, math corrupted. But this supports our hypothesis that Preadaptation has heightened jumping performance at these hotter temperatures. So next, we'll move on to different microclimate affiliations in complex landscapes. So these data were collected over 30 transects in 5 regions of southern Costa Rica, and each point here represents the mean number of individuals encountered in one of these transects over 3 visits, as well as the maximum daily temperature of that transect. So again, what you see here is that Preadaptation is found in colder environments, whereas deforestation-affiliated species is found in warmer environments. So again, supporting that preadaptation hypothesis. And what I didn't tell you about the previous figure is that these data were actually collected along an elevational transect in Costa Rica. And not surprisingly, the pasture is always warmer than forest. But as you move up in elevation, the temperature in both habitats declines, such that the temperature in pasture in these highest elevations is actually lower than the temperature in forest at the lowest elevations. And as a result of these changing temperature regimes over elevational space, what you see is actually habitat switching occurring in these two species. Whereas at mid-elevations, you see Preadaptation being the only species that occupies forest, and Fitzingeri being the only species that occupies pasture. But as you move downslope, Fitzingeri begins to occupy these forest areas. And if you move upslope and it's getting colder, Preadaptation can move into pasture and maintain populations in both sites. So this is really strong evidence that the temperature is indeed kind of the driving force here in determining deforestation tolerance. And just to kind of mop things up, in this section of the talk, we're looking at across the country of Costa Rica, looking at different macro climate affiliations. And these are all points from museum specimen data that are geo-referenced. The white points are the Preadaptation, black points are the more forest-affiliated Preadaptation. And if you just look at the mean annual temperature from the areas that these points come from, just as one would expect, Preadaptation is found in warmer habitats, or warmer macroclimates than is Preadaptation. So, of course, these are only 2 species, so there's an ongoing question as to whether this is actually generalizable or if this is just a kind of cherry-picked example that supports this hypothesis. So, to deal with this, we're actually looking at 33 species, reptiles and amphibians, in that focal landscape in southern Costa Rica. And if you use the climatic niche center, so this is from museum specimen data, again, like the macroclimate section. So if you find each species climate niche center along the temperature axis, and then you deforestation tolerance in this focal landscape. So this is just the number, the proportion of individuals that were captured either in deforested habitats versus forested habitats. You see this strong correlation between warm adapted species being more deforestation tolerant than cold adapted species. And the important thing here is that temperature is the most significant predictor of habitat affiliation, with some subtleties working their way with body size in just amphibians. So larger frogs are able to be more deforestation tolerant than smaller frogs. And kind of the interesting thing here is the things that are not significant predictors that many people think would be. So breeding habitat for amphibians is not a significant predictor, so this is whether they breed on land or in various types of water. The species structural niche is not as significant predictor. We kind of suspect that some of these arboreal species might not be found in deforested areas, but in some cases, they're actually quite good at using, say, poppy plantations. And also the precipitation niche doesn't appear to be important. So moisture availability doesn't seem to be a strong structuring force in deforested versus forested habitats. So in conclusion, it seems like tropical deforestation is increasing local temperature, which is causing pre-adapted species from lower elevations to benefit. And this is kind of where some of that geographic structure or reshuffling gets in. Just quickly, it looks like a lot of these warm adapted low elevation species were able to move upslope after humans have deforested the area because the temperature kind of now mimics the thermal environment they were adapted to in the lowlands. So I have some preliminary genetic data from the two focal frog species in the mid-elevation study landscape that supports that conclusion. And if you'd like to talk to me about that, just let me. So it's an ongoing question as to whether contemporary thermal adaptation is occurring in these species, and that's kind of the next direction that I'm planning to take this investigation in. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge various people of the Daily and Hadley Labs, particularly at Stanford, as well as Randy Figueroa, Jason Figueroa, and Lisa Shields-Estrada, Madeline Sides for